you go.
I'm not wearing my glasses.
And I started both the cameras this time.
Sweet. I heard that costs extra.
We had only one of those so far that really, really broke down, where I mechanically failed us for these things. So, hey everybody, welcome to the Grimdark Media. We're back after several weeks of just like life getting in the way.
Real life sucks, man.
Fucking does suck. Hey, we just watch movies and play games.
Yeah, that's all I want to do.
That's all I want to do. That's all I want to do. I want to forget about the slow erosion of our humanity and society by diving into the slow, fast erosion of other societies.
My family keeps talking about paying for groceries and stuff. I don't want to do it. I'm tired of it.
Cauliflower costs $10. I don't want to eat cauliflower anymore. Exactly. I like that vegetables are the new currency, basically. I'm so glad I grow my vegetables in the summer.
I mean, at this point, should I just be eating the pictures of the food from the flyers they send me? Like, I can afford that.
You probably have more nutritional value than most of the alternatives, to be fair. There's not a lot of meat in these gym mats. Well, so today we are back with a game media piece, and this was actually suggested and therefore played through by Andrew B. I'm not going to dox anybody, but one of my patrons on Patreon, who very kindly shouted at me in one of our live streams and threw super chats at me to pay for me buying this game on PS4. And we're going to review this. This is called Pathologic II. This is from 2019. This was a crowdfunded and delivered PC game that was then ported into PS4 and is a reimagining, remake, redux, upscaling of Pathologic 1. So it's
we talked about the fact it's like the Evil Dead 2.
It's Evil Dead 2 situation. Exactly. Yeah. So without getting too far ahead of ourselves, if you haven't watched Grimdark Media before, this is a show in which we break down pieces of media that we think fall into that category as having that sort of grimdark feel and allowing us to experience uncomfortable, weird, dark topics in a safe, narrative, engaging, and sometimes subversive way. Pathologic 2 is, well, what did you think about this game?
So I got to be honest, when I saw the first trailer, because I saw the trailer before I downloaded any of the content for it, I was really stoked about it. Like,
it looked like it was just something I'd never heard of.
Atmospherically, it looked amazing. The voiceover narration, which is funny because I know some people were down on the narration in the trailer. I thought it was really good. I really liked it. It looked great. I got to be honest, and like I said before when we were off camera, I don't want to crap on what anybody really likes. Almost like the first minute in the game, it just turned me right off.
Yeah, I hated this game.
Yeah, it didn't work for me.
I hated this game.
Sorry, everybody who likes it. It's not a value judgment.
No, it's not. Media doesn't have to be for everybody.
No.
But I also hated this game. So I got just for like full disclosure, I got about 5 hours into this game. And that I had to make myself get that far into this game, because this game, another reviewer described. So what we did was, after playing it, both of us you dipped your toes in. I played for about 5 hours. We went and read plot synopses and watched YouTube videos on it to try and like absorb the ending and stuff like that to see what we thought about it. Cause like this game beat me up. Like, it literally beat me up. The reviewer that got it the most said that this is a pain simulator.
So what I found really interesting about it, to both decry and defend the game at the same time.
Yeah.
What I found really interesting about it was when I read a lot of critical reviews, the critical reviews were generally speaking middling to at best. But there are a ton of people who are super, super passionate about this game and love it. Sorry, I shouldn't say a ton of people. There is a small group of people who's super passionate about it.
It has a fan base, yeah.
And I think that juxtaposition is very telling, right? Because if this is for you, it's amazingly immersive.
Super for you, yeah.
And because it's so unique, nothing else is really competing for your time. Like, you can invest a ton into this.
Exactly.
Whereas, if you like a more traditional, like a looter shooter video game or party games or stuff like that, there's always the next thing coming down the pipe. This, even as a survival, I'm going to say all capital survival, all lowercase horror, even as a survival horror experience, it's not like any other survival horror video game. Like, you're not rushing to finish this so that you can play something else.
So we're going, just to give a brief synopsis before we get into Bon Voyage, which is our section in which we give an overview of the story of the game. This is based in a post-revolution Russian unnamed town somewhere in the steppes, where you're effectively trying to cure a plague, and you play as a protagonist known as the Haruspex. He's a trained surgeon, come back to town, basically the request of his father, to try and solve the mystery of this like dust plague, basically, that shows up in town. And from a game overview point of view, which we won't do in point of view, I should talk about it for now. This should have been my shit. This is exactly what I like. I'm a huge fan of survival games, not necessarily survival horror games, but like I love like The Long Dark, which has actually pulled a ton of mechanical stuff from this game where you're managing cold and hunger and thirst, and sleep basically as like 3 core sort of principles. And you're having to do it with almost no resources. You have to collect and find resources all the time. I love those kinds of games because I love that mental exercise of what is the best, worst decision I can make to survive something. And the premise is great. It's it's an early like 20th century. The premise is great.
The setting was really good.
Mm-hmm. The sort of like dark tone of the setting is fantastic. And you're trying to solve this sort of mystery and do various fast questions and survive the whole time. And it takes place over the course of 12 days. Really 11 because the 12 is kind of the epilogue. And as long as you can survive those 12 days and nights, again, time is a resource in this game. Because the plague and all of the things that the other sort of like people who are bound to you that are like the main sort of like characters around you are trying to do, it happens no matter what you do. So like events unfold and you're watching events unfold over this timeline loop. And we'll talk about that when we get into Bon Voyage. But this should have been very much for me and somehow was not for me.
We're 2 minutes in and describing it. I'm already tired. I'm just tired. I'm not anxious. I'm not like the emotions it's meant to elicit. It's not quite there. I'm just tired.
It felt like a Russian Revolution era novel in real life, but with like weird mysticism and stuff like baked into it. So anyway, let's dive into the story now. We've given you our synopsis, our overall feelings. And we have to now, I guess, try and find some broken bottles and bandages, talk to some weird children, encounter a giant auroch on the train tracks coming into town.
See what people's insides look like.
See what lots of people's insides look like. Have lots of people dissolve into people wearing masks. Weird sort of like play actors who we don't think are dead or maybe are alive. It's very pretentious.
At the start of this, you mentioned that both cameras were recording. You might just want to turn off the one
that's facing you. Yeah. As your eyes roll back in your head. If you start snoring, it'll be fine. And we'll set off, I guess, in this train car to try on a summons from our father as we go Bon Voyage.
Pack your bags and chew off your fingers. It's time for Bon Voyage.
All right, so in Bon Voyage, we spoil everything. So if you are planning on playing through the full extent of Pathologic II, then stop now. Go play the game for however thousands of hours you need to get through the 11th day. Then seek some therapy for the damage that's done to you, and then come back. But if you don't, then welcome to our synopsis. Again, there are a million side quests you can go on, but the overall thrust of this story is relatively simple. Your name is Artur Burak, I think it is, Burak. And you are Artemi Burak. Artemi.
How is that not the first line of my notes?
I don't know. I'm going from memory here. And your father, who is effectively
Artemi Burak, yeah.
Artemi Burak, yeah. You're the father who is effectively the town doctor in this town, sends you a summons. You're living in the city, studying to be a surgeon. And it brings you back to town. But before that even happens, you end up in a weird state basically at the end of a story where you're talking to this guy named Immortel in a theater, and he starts front loading a bunch of information to you that things aren't going to make sense, that you failed in your job, do you want another chance, do you want to try, and you get the idea that after you've selected this character and you have this conversation that you're actually at the end of the story.
Yeah, you're on day 12
and you say I want another try. You have a bunch of dialogue tree options you can go through. And you select the idea. And Immortel is obsessed with the idea that you can create this perfect being and that he's going to make a play where this perfect being emerges and that all of civilization will be solved by doing so. And a lot of like already front loading stuff. And first time playing through the game, it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't have to make sense. I'm kind of like piecing together like, yeah, okay, this guy's my quest giver sort of, and I'm coming into like a Star Trek time loop thing where the Enterprise is blowing up over and over again.
It's a little bit you can see it alternatively as, kind of the, what is reality? It's reality within reality. Yeah. Is the experience of the game reality, or is the experience of you acting out the game reality? It also gives very much that Watchmen, Dr. Manhattan sitting on Mars
Yeah,
talking
it's
his way through the
1982
timeline
and I'm
vibe.
doing this. Yeah. I got a little St. Elmo's fire in it too. That we're all in a snow globe at the end of the whole fucking thing.
St. Elsewhere.
St. Elsewhere, sorry. St. Elsewhere. Little St. Elsewhere thing. We're all in a snow globe of some kid at the end of the whole thing. And that apparently was one of the endings. Like there was a gut punch ending in the original version that alludes to that. So front loading this at the beginning of the game kind of makes sense.
And my understanding, and correct the fact that I'm sure I'm wrong in the comments, but my understanding when I went through the actual notes and stuff online about the game is that the game as released is only supposed to have been a third of the game. Like there was supposed to be
There's
two
two more
characters.
storylines that you can play through in the original one. There's a girl called the Changeling who's like a mystical character.
Right.
And there's the Bachelor, which is the original sort of true storyline, the original storyline from Pathologic I, who is, I think, your dad, question mark? There's basically like another doctor who's trying to solve the problems. And so you end up, the academic is what he's called, in this game. And they're not done yet. Apparently those are going to get released as part of like the crowdfunding.
Yeah. So, but it does give me the sense that as much as I didn't enjoy the narrative, like maybe the narrative.
There's two other narratives. Well, it's like playing
Maybe
Claire
I'm
and
missing
Leon in
part of
Resident
it.
Evil 2, right?
Yeah.
You can play as a different story basically, and it's the same effective game.
Right.
But you get a different take on the same events from a different camera angle, basically.
I wish I'd been playing Resident Evil 2.
There's a new Resident Evil 2 to be playing through even.
I've got that too.
I have that too. We should do Resident Evil 2. So then the sort of like thrust that you realize is no matter how many times you die in this game, because you'll die a lot potentially, or you can scum save, which is what I did because I realized I didn't want to die a lot. Because every time you die, you get a random penalty to the point where the random penalties pile up so much that you're like practically, you have no health and like you get thirsty faster. And if you get 8 penalties, 8 deaths, one of the endings of the game gets locked off and you just can't get it anymore.
It's funny, right? Because in a traditional game, death is a traditional action-y, adventure-y, horror-y survival game. Death is your negative outcome. In this game, your negative outcome is the stacking of multiple deaths.
This is a point I'm going to come to at the end where like usually I'll come to it at the end. I have a whole bunch to talk about with that, but this is the basic premise that you're front loaded from the beginning of the game.
Yeah.
Is there's a cyclical time loop that you've been going through. You're asking for another try and you wake up on a train heading into town. A random guy falls out of a coffin and starts talking to you. And you generally when you arrive at town, you don't even make it in because there's a giant bull standing on the tracks. Everything is immediately like surreal. We got a real Twin Peaks vibe here. You're confronted by these guys in like their like plague doctor masks. And then you effectively try and walk to the end of the train tracks, drop dead, and then wake up in like a stone circle with these people called the Kin. And we're kind of introduced to all the main factions in this first like act before you get through day one. Day one is you kind of arriving at the thing. And it's all trial and error, man. Like you're just wandering around walking simulator style, like trying to figure out what you can touch, what you can interact with that does anything. You die a whole bunch, you wake up, you end up in a fist fight in a stone circle with these people called the Kin. He gives you a new heart because your heart is rotten. Like there's a lot of like, it's just symbolism and it's very heavy handed. And I enjoyed this first hour. I'll be honest. I didn't not enjoy this first hour because I was too confused to have made up my mind about it really. Because the game says you're going to be confused and you're going to have to play through multiple times and you're going to have to absorb this in bits and pieces. So please don't give up on this game. Like it literally tells you that at the beginning of the game. And I'm like, all right, I'm game. Let's go. Like the path's got to be worth it, right?
You're a better person than I am.
So I blithely died in this fist fight, and we're kind of introduced to our two core protagonists. There's the town, which is being beset by this like sickness. It's the end of some revolution. It's being controlled by soldiers. There's a church full of kind of like the elders of the town, these different families who are involved, and also the government agency that's controlling it with soldiers. They're burning bodies to try and control a plague that keeps coming into town. And then you have what's called the Kin, which is these people who live out in the steppes who are kind of like more mystically minded. And these are the sort of two opposing dichotomies you're trying to work your way through.
It's almost, so the game is set during the Russian Revolution, right?
Yeah.
So the 1917 to 1923, that era. And it's almost like the plot and the characters of the game, they're making this hard divide. And you're in the DMZ between those two divides of the kind of fantasy, science fiction, mysticism, folklore side of it, as all of that fades into memory and becomes the real world.
The future,
pretty
basically,
much.
that we're moving towards. And and that's kind of where you are. You're in that frictional place in between. And you're basically coming out of this theater and arriving inside a hospital and realizing that you're being tasked with trying to save the town. The timeline is set because the army's going to obliterate the town to stop the infection in 12 days if you don't stop it.
Yeah.
And as you sort of like traverse these 12 days, every day you're kind of given a primary goal, and that goal will keep one of your sort of people that you're starting to encounter, as like your main protagonists, happy and alive. But they can just be, if you don't complete that goal or get sidetracked on a side quest, you can just, like, they go off and do it and get sick and might die.
Yeah, you're badly misusing the word happy.
Yeah, so the main premise of this is you're just constantly trying to collect resources. So on day one, you're just trying to eat. And you might be given a side quest that there's a shelter. Like, so I'll give you an example, just to pick from one of these side quests. The side quest is that you're trying to convince the army right now that the plague's real, that you can do something about it to get the power to now operate on people and create a cure. Because they don't believe you. They've told you that they don't believe that you can actually do anything. You're not a real doctor. And so you're trying to prove that the plague exists. There's a side quest you get where the people in the town already believe it exists in these different sort of like suburbs and neighborhoods that you can go to. And they're asking you to collect, they give you money to buy food and bandages so they can set up a shelter to have people shelter inside of. And so you spend your day either potentially doing this side quest or trying to find a plague house so that you can bring that information back to the powers that be and like prove that this place exists. So I went and did this. I had to sell everything I owned because they didn't give me enough money to actually buy everything they needed, and walk to like every single store to try and find enough food and enough bandages and stuff to take back to like do this thing. And when I finally get it and finally complete the quest, I go to where the shelter's supposed to be. Or I go to my quest giver and I give her the items. She tells me where the shelter's going to be. I go there and everyone's already dead of the plague. There's just a bunch of the like plague doctors hanging out there and they've already all died. Nothing good comes of it. In fact, I've given all of my resources away and am slowly starving to death. And she's like, oh, I go back to the quest giver. She's like, oh, sorry, here's some nuts. Sorry about that. That sucks. That sucks that happened. And the only silver lining is I now have my plague house that I can take back and give to the powers that be to give me these emergency powers to become a doctor. And that is symbolic of all the shit I did in this game. All I learned about this game is if you make morally upright choices and aren't out for yourself, everything gets harder. Everything sucks. And you just get punished for doing the right thing over and over again.
Yeah. It's funny to go back to where you started talking about that side quest. So what's interesting about your character, and again, this to me is the most interesting part of the game, is the fact that you're on this dividing line between the old ways and some semblance of reality. Mm-hmm. Is your character's nickname the Haruspex. So Haruspex is somebody who reads entrails, like reads meaning in entrails. So you've got your one foot stepped in that. But you're also working on becoming a scientific medical doctor. Yep. And this is where that friction is again between you're not a real doctor, you're a witch doctor, but also maybe a real doctor.
Well, your reputation actually goes down if you act like a real doctor, unless you get the kin to vet you so that you're allowed to do autopsies and stuff like that. Because one of the most fruitful ways you can make money in this game is by autopsying bodies and cutting out their organs and selling them.
Everybody needs to make hot dogs out of something.
But if you're not the Haruspex, if you're not given the blessing basically of the kin to do that, your reputation will go down and people will stop interacting with you and you'll have like quest lines get cut off, right? Yeah. Like people won't talk to you, they won't deal with you anymore. So yeah, there's that, and that becomes a big dividing factor.
Yep.
You also discover that you can make what they call a panacea, which is the Greek word for, I think, shield or like cure-all, basically.
Yeah.
Which will cure the plague. There's also this random stuff that you can buy off kids every now and again that almost kills you but cures the plague. And as we go through each of these days, various quests are given to you, and you're trying to balance keeping the person who's your quest giver typically alive by completing the quest or by getting like a cure that you can give them to cure it if they get sick, and then getting to the next day. There's also a night market you can occasionally visit during the night, although the night's very quiet. None of the shops are open, but there's like this weird night market where you can trade junk dead items to get like really good items back. And over these 12 days, one of the things I started to realize is, oh, this game is forcing me to spend more time doing it so that this time goes by. Like the futility part of it becomes apparent as you're bombarded with these like zero-sum choices and no positive outcome choices.
So in most video games that have this kind of role-playing video games that have this kind of narrative structure overall, you've got this main quest and you have, possibly a massive amount of side quests. But for a typical player playing them that's not on their first playthrough, they're very focused on the main quest. This game's very different in that the bulk of the game is made up of the side quests. Like if we were to just sit here and to break down absolutely nothing but the linear main quest, this video would be 5 minutes long. And that's not a dig. It's very simple. It's very straightforward. There's a start and there's an end, but everything in between is basically comprised of the side quests.
Yeah. Because then Inquisitor shows up in town after several of these days go by. She's hated kind of by the kin. She's sort of like the antagonist that you are forced to make a choice between this like progressive new world that you're going to go into where there's a tower, this like weird tower that links heaven and earth that's pierced these boils underground, and you discover that like the plague is basically it's engineered by the old ways and the inhabitants of the town. It's coming up from underground. And if you're given a choice, a binary choice, basically, you either blow up this tower, and if you do so, enough of this blood gets released. There's a panacea that you get to make as much of it as you want, because you find some of the blood leaking out of the ground out in the village where the kin come from, and you're able to make like 2 doses of the panacea, but that's it. Or you leave it in place, the mysticism continues to like grow, and you kind of reestablish the old ways, and the kin come back into town. And they start to take over, and their mysticism is kind of restored basically to power. You basically choose to become the setting of a 20th century horror movie, or you choose to push that back and become a normal 20th century town. That's the choice. Yeah, it's Innsmouth or Arkham. It's one of those 2 choices, and you're the person in between that gets to make that happen. And all the while, every time you die, you get set back. And you have to start over with worse chances of actually doing anything.
All the time that you die.
All the time that you die. And you can die from anything. You can die from thirst. You can die from hunger. You can die if any of your stats go to 0, your overall health bar starts to deplete.
You die like Dirk the Daring did in Dragon's Lair. Like you just die.
You just die. And so that is the main thrust of the story, is you're presented with this binary choice, and one of these 2 outcomes happen, and you're either crowned kind of as the savior of old mystical Russia, or you're of the steppe people and the kin, or you're clearing the way for progress, ostensibly to come through, and you save the town from being destroyed by the army and the modern sort of people. That's it. So, yeah, we're gonna structurally in the gameplay and stuff like that, we're gonna get into when we get a bit further on, but for now. We're going to get dragged back to the theater by bird people, locked in, sort of like this dirty, rusty place with, what's his name? Marcus Immortel. That's like John Everyman. Like that's the worst name.
Maybe Dirk Awesome Sauce wasn't available.
I hate that name. I get that this game's translated from Russian, but like just naming him Immortel as he looks for the perfect immortal person. I don't know. Yeah, it's when Stewie says to Brian, "You named your main character John Everyman." Like it's really on the nose.
There's sometimes you got to remember that when you put something in as a placeholder, you got to change it out before you publish.
Yeah. And so we see obviously in the theater there is a gift shop that we could buy some bird masks in, some cool sort of like Harlequin masks or whatever these things are called for these people that are now reprising a role. We end up in the Dark Exhibition.
Gallery to the left, gift shop to the right. Have your tickets ready for the Dark Exhibition.
So in the Dark Exhibition, this is where we talk about where this sits on the spectrum of art versus product. And as we've done in the past, we try and just, if you want to go watch the original video on this topic, things can kind of fall into 2 categories, and neither of them are value judgments. You can have great art, you can have terrible art, you can have great products, you can have terrible products. It's more, how is this being designed, and what is the lens that this kind of fell through for us as we viewed it. So neither of us picked this, but I'll go first because this is, to me, definitely an art house project. It took 5 years to make from the point of the Kickstarter to getting delivered in 2019. And it is aggressively trying to gild the lily here, right? You are trying to make something that is tonally challenging, that presents with tons of like no positive outcome choices and makes you think about like, what would it be like to be in this situation where there's a conflict between sort of the past and the present, mysticism and science, through the lens of like a post-Civil War society where there's all this scarcity, deaths around every corner, plague is happening, and you're surrounded by desperate people who are negatively interacting with you. You actively get lied to in this game. Like, people just don't tell you the truth. You do everything, like you do the Picard thing. It's possible to do everything right and still not win.
Yep.
Right? Like that lesson, which is, again, weirdly better summed up by a TNG episode, I think, than this game.
More concisely summed up by a TNG episode.
Yeah, by one of Picard's best lines in TNG. And again, this is attempting to create messages and opportunities for you to feel something. And there's a lot of opportunities for you to feel something, I think, to the point at which I feel nothing now.
I feel tired.
So I think this definitely lands on the side of art, of being intended to be art, and a ton of work and dialogue and writing being going into. So like, if your appetite is for that, and having a near infinite amount of lore and digression and human interaction and individual plot, like every NPC in this has a huge amount of story you can dig into. You have like a near infinite bottomless pit.
As a role-playing experience,
role-playing, yeah.
It definitely feels like probably the most immersive role-playing experience you could have.
Especially for being on a clock,
yeah.
Right? And forcing you down a choice where you don't necessarily, and again, it does this thing fairly, like the original did this kind of fairly early on, but it does this thing where like, it does the BioShock of like, did you have agency? Or was it the illusion of agency? That's a big theme in this. But there's so many themes that like, there's so many themes.
Even my symbols have symbols.
That's it. Yeah. Like, I felt it was overwhelming. Like, there was just so much work being done in this. And for some people, I think their appetite for that is why they've landed on this being like one of the greatest pieces of Grimdark Media of all time. And I completely understand that. For me, it was a tonal megaphone screaming at me the entire time, but then never speeding up to an ending. So I'm just crawling through this screaming sort of like experience. It's not even screaming, it's like droning experience of like this 12-day cycle that you're going through. So where did this fall for you?
Yeah, so it's interesting. We kind of talked about this before we started recording. So in the whole art versus product cycle, Ash always prefaces this by explaining that art versus product isn't a value judgment, and we both feel that, but we didn't really carry that through our first few reviews, because it seemed like our first few reviews, most of the stuff that we landed on as art, we both generally really liked.
Yeah, that's true.
And most of the stuff we landed on as product, we liked less. And then it wasn't until recently where we had a bunch of things, and they were all things that were product things, but that we thought they still had merit. So now I'm going to swing the pendulum the other way. And this is, because this is purely art.
Yep.
But this, for me as the audience member, this is art for art's sake. I'm not engaged by this. I'm not entertained by this. I recognize what they're going for, and I can respect it. Like, if you are the audience for it, I can respect that you've gotten something out of this. But this, to me, is it. Again, I know I forget who I'm stealing this quote from. It has the stink of the auteur on it. Like, it is somebody who made something to entertain themselves and their friends. Maybe entertain's the wrong word. There's no payoff for anything. And I don't mean like you're trying to make something grimdark.
Yeah.
You know, if you want it to be really gritty, you want it to feel grimdark. I'm not talking about feeling rewarded. I'm talking about, I don't feel like I learned anything when it's over. I don't feel like it had a statement to make about what it was talking about. if I can veer slightly to the left or slightly to the side, let's say for a second, we talk a lot on this channel about genre movies and genre books because it's what we're talking about.
Yeah, it's the whole point of this.
In terms of the art versus product thing, and this might be a little too outside for certain people or people that are a lot younger than me, I've never liked any Vincent Gallo movies. This is the video game equivalent of a Vincent Gallo movie.
I feel like we're going to be having the same conversation about this, or you're going to be, when we do Megalopolis. When we do Francis Ford Coppola's Megalopolis, the like 10-year, $50 million of his own money
as
nightmare. Apparently,
this is one of those art installation type things.
Yeah,
where it's like, I get that you're making a statement, you're trying to create a feeling, but I don't feel what you want me to feel, and I didn't hear your statement.
Yeah. This is Yoko Ono in The Simpsons ordering a perfume in a men's hat.
Hat with a plum,
perfume in a men's hat at the bar, and Mo being like, okay.
I'm not,
weird for the sake of weird.
And I have to say, I think the reason why I seem so disappointed and so let down by this is conceptually, I love what this could have been. Like, I look at let's say the outline of what this game is, and I think, oh man, this could be great. And then I don't get that. And again, a lot of people I'm sure are going to say that I missed the point or that I am not the target audience, which is cool. But man, it was art, and it was not art that I enjoyed.
It's very ambitious. It's incredibly ambitious art. Okay. Well, having now said that, we exit left without buying anything.
I'm not buying any of the crap in this gift shop.
Not buying that gift shop, no. Because there's not very many things to buy. Actually, you have to trade like finger bones and broken glass for it. The payment method, and the prices are way up since they closed the roads. Since the train shut down, the price has gone way up. Which is a thing that happens in this game, by the way. The economy spirals out of control, and you can't afford anything at one point. And so we want.
Thank God it's just a video game.
I know. So we end up surrounded by people in weird masks, all saying that they are now replaying the role of their lives, so that someone else can do it. As again, symbolism on symbolism, the same moppet basically going over and over again. And scratched in the walls of one of these sort of like survivor enclaves in the plague districts, we see different messages, which will of course lead us to try and interpret them and figure out what the overall themes of this was, as we move from the Dark Exhibition into our next segment.
As night descends, we scratch our messages into the walls. Future warnings for inmates of the Grim Asylum.
All right, so in this segment, we are going to be throwing down the sort of like overall tones, themes, and symbols that we were able to draw from this that make us think it's grimdark. And this is probably one we have to be careful with, because this does firmly fall into grimdark.
Oh, 100%.
And the sort of like value we drew from it isn't commensurate to whether or not this is Grimdark Media. It absolutely is. And the tones and sort of like overall themes, you should try to pick about 3 each that rang through at this, are I think like the things that we'll sort of like come back to, that will definitely put this on the list. Whether or not we enjoyed it is completely irrelevant. And there will definitely be people who are watching this who either will have already loved this, or who should check this out and will probably love it. Like if you love a big, dense, deep, crunchy, like lore heavy game that you're going to spend 1 million hours playing and be frustrated by, then this is probably for you.
Will say, if you want something more pop culturally to identify whether or not you're the kind of person who would like this, if you're the kind of person who would want to reread The Road, like I loved The Road. I have no desire to reread that at all. If you're the kind of person who would want to reread The Road, like come back to it,
again.
This is probably for you.
Yeah.
Like honestly.
Yeah. And that it's funny because the reread part of it is actually very on tone for
baked
this,
in.
because it's baked in, because you will end up rereading this over and over again. So in this part, I think we're going to be looking at the first tones, and I'll get us started here, because in gameplay wise, one of the things you're constantly doing here is managing your various stats. You're trying to keep yourself from starving or bleeding out or whatever. And you're also trying to, you think, make moral choices that will please or displease the population, because your reputation can go down or up with the different factions. And this game isn't about making that decision positively.
You know, I feel like as we're recording this video, our reputation is either going up or down with certain
It's entirely
factions.
possible. It's entirely possible. This game is about you being punished for
just being punished.
There's
no for.
Sorry. This game is about the object lesson that sometimes you can do everything right and bad things still happen to you. And that sense for me is futility. Like the futility sort of like gene in this game is so strong where you accomplish your sort of like linear goal in a side quest or in a primary quest, but a bad outcome still happens. Or you get to the end of the game and you haven't secured all your protagonists so that a bad thing happens. Like regardless, you don't get either of the endings. You don't even get to make the choice. Just like time runs out and they shell the town and you die, right? Like you have to get certain people to survive through with you by giving them panacea or giving them the weird cure you can get from the kids. It's like McGuff or something. I don't know, like whatever it's called that poisons you. And that sense of futility, like from the 5 hours I put in the game, was with me all the time. Like people begging for water, people, trying to trade things that might seem valueless for you for things that more valuable. Like the kids would always give you bullets and stuff. Like at one point you get a gun, and the best thing you can do with that gun is sell it to buy more food because the gun's really valuable. And you never actually want to get in any fights anyway, like because the combat system's super clunky. You're just gonna die. So what would in a survival horror game feel like a big moment of triumph, where you manage to like convince the government that you need these emergency powers, and they also arm you to keep you safe on the streets at night. And the best thing you can do with that gun is sell it. And then like the kids will trade you like things that you find like nuts or little bits of food for things like bullets because they don't have any value to them. They're just like, whatever, it's just we found these, like here, have them. Like there's no like linear economy in the game.
No.
It's whoever you're talking to might put more or less value on stuff, and you got to figure that out in real time. So like you can, and sometimes they just lie. So you do a quest and like nothing good happens. So that feeling of futility was like baked into this game for me. And it makes the gameplay so unrewarding. Like you just don't feel good while you're playing at all. So what was yours?
So normally when we do this and you bring up something I have on my list, I move it and make it the thing I'm going to talk about right away.
Sure.
I'm not doing that this time.
Okay.
I'm going to leave futility to the end.
Okay.
Because I want to end on the rant, not be ranting halfway through this.
Okay, fair enough.
So I'm going to go with bleakness.
Sure. Yes.
A lot of the same things that you just talked about. Futility is the feeling of the actions that you're describing. Bleakness is the emotion it leaves me with afterwards. Like it's everything you did feels so pointless. And it's not just that it feels pointless, because that's futility.
Yep.
It's that it never gets any better.
Nope.
Like it never gets any better. It never gets any better. So that sense, and I mean that's just very Russian, because like that. Yeah, that's something.
It's like a Dostoevsky novel.
That's something that fits very much into stuff like Roadside Picnic and other media that we've talked about. So that's not it. You know, I'm saying it obsessively and repeatedly. It's not that it's necessarily a bad thing when you're trying to create that sense of grim darkness, because it really, more than any of the visual aesthetics, that's what makes it feel grim dark to me. Is that sense that it doesn't matter what you do. Nothing gets better. You're never in a better position than you were yesterday. And every tomorrow is still worse than every yesterday, which was already bad.
I had this Polish friend of my dad's when I was a kid who taught us this card game. It's a Russian card game. And I can't remember the name of the game is, but his name was Waldemar. But he explained how to play this. He's like, no one wins this game. You just lose last. So the person that wins the game is the person that loses last. And I was like, that's the most Russian description of anything I've ever heard in my entire life. It's that sort of fatalistic, early like 20th century sort of like writing style. Yeah, is just completely baked into this.
And it is meant to. Again, it's actively meant to evoke that emotional reaction from you. Like I'm making it sound like I'm being harsh and critical about it, and but it actually accomplishes that. Like it accomplishes one of the goals it sets out to for sure.
Yeah, I have nothing more to add to that because I also picked Bleakness as my second one. So. Yeah, that's like really to me, it does feel like a post-revolution Russian novel where they're kind of like embracing that part of their culture of like suffering being baked into life. And it's sort of a stoic kind of message where you accept things that are going on. You accept that things are unchangeable or immutable or facts of life. But in this one, it's like, that includes a lot of very upsetting things like honesty and death. Like, you can, the bleakness is omnipresent as you watch people just like having like piles of bodies being flamethrowered, soldiers executing people. Like, it's so dark. Like this, you show up and it's already this way. You show up from the city and the town is already basically completely fucked, and under martial law. And then you have to prove there's also plague happening at some point so that like you can get the power that you need to take advantage of that. And things immediately just get worse. They get worse and worse and worse. So why don't we go back to you and then
So my second one, and this is actually the one that I liked the best about it. I've ragged a lot on the game, but this is the one I liked the best about how the game plays and feels. And it's Decline. And the reason why I liked it so much is there is two completely separate declines happening. And selling you on the whole grim darkness and the futility and the bleakness of it is, at the end of the game, actually kind of like your card game, you're not choosing which positive outcome you're going to get. You're choosing which decline to let happen, to let something else continue on. Because effectively,
one of the two sides is going to go away.
Yeah, because effectively what you're doing, again, we touched on it earlier, the whole idea that you're at that fulcrum, you're at that tipping point between folklore and mysticism and the modern world. And ultimately the decision you're building to at the end of the game is, which of these things are you going to let die? And I don't mean die for that town, but which of these, like, are you going to say goodbye to the old ways and abandon, like I said, the folklore, the mysticism side, the roots of your culture and your society, the thing that you were before you were trying to become the man that you're trying to become in the story? Or are you going to see the future as being the right future? Sorry, that was that. Or are you going to hold on to those old ways and abandon the idea of, I'm still going to do the air quotes, progress, because I'm not really sure that it's progress. But
you're also abandoning basically curing the town too, because I don't know if we mentioned this, but actively parts of the town are falling to plague and becoming closed off, and like the town itself is blighted with this like weird shit.
And I don't even see it, like, even though what's happening is the town is falling to plague, I don't even see it as falling to plague. I see it as letting that sense of folklore and mysticism and nature reclaim everything. And that's the mechanism by which it's reclaiming things. So
mentioning, sorry, the kin are the only ones who don't get sick, because they're like a weird collectivist society, and they're very like anti-Randian, where like they've rejected the word I. So like they're like a weird almost hive mind at some point, and they're now immune to the plague. They don't get sick from it.
So the decline is one, it's something that I felt strongly through the whole thing. But the other thing is, it felt like, again, when I was ragging on the artiness of it, the decline felt like the thing where the artiness actually serviced that as a storytelling element. So I liked it. 2, I found it interesting and rewarding. And 3, it felt like what was planted and painted over the canvas was delivered that way. So that's my second one.
Sweet. Well, my third one, my final one, so that you can end on futility, is incomprehensibility.
Yeah.
And this is by intent. They front load at the beginning of the game. They tell you multiple playthroughs to actually suss out what's going on in the story. This is going to need to happen. It is objectively nonlinear storytelling, because you can play through, and because of the way that parts of the town get closed off, protagonists can die, NPCs can die. You just can have whole plot lines just end with no satisfying conclusion and no like being able to dig through into it. And there's so many of them to keep track of that, like, unless you somehow get through perfectly and everyone lives and you somehow don't run out of time. And one of the criticisms this got when it first came out to like mixed reviews was it's just too hard, and you walk so slowly, you cannot get through everything in a day. So they immediately added slider bars to the difficulty, where one of the things you could do is literally just speed up your walking pace. And that is a complete game changer. Just not walking down like you're an 80-year-old man can completely change the game from being horribly tedious. I don't want to cheat. I don't want to do any of these like slider bar things and change the difficulty, because I wanted to play the game as intended. But literally that was by design, so that you couldn't follow these threads to conclusion, and some shit just doesn't make any sense and you get no logical outcomes or positive, like even just like understanding of what's happening without playing the game more than once. And that does service the idea of you feeling overwhelmed, and like there's a million different rabbit holes you can run down. And mechanically, they've obviously made this as like an actual choice. So that sort of like bewilderment get like showing like starting in the theater with freaking Johnny Immortal or whatever his name is, and Marky Immortal, and having to like suss out what the hell is going on for yourself. And for me, having no prior knowledge of the original game, I bet people that played the first game, this was great.
Yeah.
Because this was just more exposition and a prettier package that they got to like chase down and interact with in an interesting way. For me, not having any context of any of this, it was a bewildering experience, a blizzard of information, endless rabbit holes, no explanation as to what you're doing and why. So you have to figure it all out in real time. It was Dark Souls times 100 of like just the learning curve of like trying to suss out this information. And so while I get that that's by design, it's an experiential design, not necessarily a design that's into the thematics and lore of the game, right? And to me, those things got disconnected. And while it is an overall theme and presented intentionally from the get-go, it didn't add to the story or the messaging for me in any positive way. It only detracted from it. It only made the game less approachable, and for me to have not any overall sort of like thematics like through a narrative plug really resonate with me because I was so immersed in the experiential emotional part of it. And that's a valid way to tell a story.
Sure.
Because I felt like the Doctor trying to pull all these pieces together mentally in my head, but I felt like the Doctor who had just been through a time loop and carried nothing from the previous one. And to me, those time loop stories where you're repeating the same stories over and over again, the bonus of that is the Groundhog's Day thing where you can just, you're a superhero at the end of it all. You know all the pieces. And this game didn't deliver that because one, you start with nothing. So you have to do those loops for yourself to gain all the information. And two, you actively get worse every time you do it.
You start with less than nothing every time.
And we'll talk about that when we get to the Throne of Skulls. So go ahead, have us get on your soapbox.
Okay, listen, no. But to go like all Jim Cramer, Morton Downey Jr., rampaging around the place.
Yeah.
Okay, so I mentioned before, obviously my third one is futility.
Yeah. It really grinds my gears.
You know what really grinds my gears? So theoretically, if it's Grimdark and one of the themes is futility and I'm this worked up about it, that means it did its job.
Sure.
But it didn't. Because the problem for me is the futility both exists inside the story and inside the story, outside the story, and outside the story. It's way too meta. Because inside the narrative of the story, there's this sense of futility that you touched on earlier, which is effective and serves a purpose and creates part of those themes and backgrounds. The big problem for me was when I started playing the game, and like I said, I gave up super fast because it turned me off super fast. Mm-hmm. That opening scene where you've already failed and you're talking to the director of the play about taking another shot at doing it, that instantly was the moment where nothing I did mattered. Nothing had any consequence. It didn't matter if I won. It didn't matter if I lost. It didn't matter what the rest of the narrative of the story looked like, because it's like you're in the game being told by the game that you're playing a game.
They gave away the would you kindly.
Yeah.
At the beginning. It's like they gave away the would you kindly.
The would you kindly was...
That's a BioShock reference for anyone that doesn't know.
The would you kindly was an amazing moment because it was the Rod Serling twist to make you question everything you'd seen before it. If you start off asking the question outside of the context of the story itself and then put you into the story is meaningless. Mm-hmm. You're playing... Is this my Robert Downey Jr. moment now? Am I the dude dressed up as another dude playing another dude? Like at the point where you're told, oh, it all worked out bad and you failed and you didn't win. And then you're like, well, can I try again? And the answer is yes. Then who cares? Mm-hmm. Who cares how many times you try and don't win? Who cares if you're meant to experience this sense of futility? Like,
who's it happening to? Is it happening to the Haruspex or is it happening to you, Jay? Because the futility... If it doesn't serve a narrative purpose if it's happening to Jay.
Right.
If it's happening to the Haruspex, then it can actually serve a narrative purpose.
But that's my problem with it. Yeah. Is it basically it starts off by telling you that nothing is real, effectively, and then asking you to have these kind of emotional reactions. And like I said at the start, my only emotional reaction is to feel tired because I'm enduring this game to get to the start of the game effectively to find out that it didn't matter anyway. It's so, and again, if your thing is, well, I'm not looking at the I'm not peeling back enough layers of the onion, and that it's meant to make you feel this way because this is how the game thematically is supposed to feel. Yeah, but the way it brought that out into the real world diminished everything that came after it.
Yeah. So ironically, there are 3 endings in the original Pathologic 1. And I feel like they made this for their original audience and no one else, because the 2 endings at the end of Pathological 1 that you don't realize, one is that the children who are in the streets are building this copy of the big polyhedral or whatever it is, the big tower.
Polyhedron, I think.
Polyhedron. In a sandbox. And at the end of the game, one of the reveals is that you enter this room with these giants who are the children standing over.
Oh, this is your St. Elsewhere moment. Yeah.
Just St. Elsewhere moment where like the children are just playing a game and that you were just a doll basically the entire time.
And had that been the end and not kind of part of the pitch at the start, I would have found that satisfying. Very satisfying.
I would have too. But then there's another one after that where you get transported to another place and the thing starts asking you if what you think you did mattered. And you can be like, yes, no, whatever dialogue tree. And then it goes, well, and then I think you ask a question back, like, did it matter? And they go, well, I don't know. I'm just a bunch of pixels. And like, now it's talking to you, the player of the video game. And it's like a coward's St. Elsewhere where like you get pulled out, you were a doll, you get, would you kindly? And then at the end, it's like, they do the
this is that Metal Gear Solid Psycho
Mantis. Yeah, put the controller down. Yeah, they Psycho Mantis at the end of it. They like, put your controller down. And it's like, I feel like they were so assumptive that their audience was just going to be the Pathologic 1 audience that they just gave that away at the beginning and didn't let us discover on their own. And so again, I don't know who the futility's for, but it doesn't add to the narrative for me at all, because like it's like you say, it's meta for the sake of meta. Like it's just like, oh no, you're already in this time loop and you're already aware of it. It's like, then like, why do I care about anything that's happening here? And also you're punishing me for the failure state, you know what I mean? That you are actively pushing me towards with all your gameplay mechanics. So yes, we're definitely in alignment on futility. So there we go. Well, we've done it. We've picked up the bones of this carcass, and amongst them we find a lot of bird mask shaped skulls, which we then have to now arrange as we build a giant chair out of them. I think I know where yours is going. I think I know where mine's going, because we decide where
I am slightly surprised by where I put it.
Interesting. Well, then we're going to decide where this sits in the landscape of Grimdark Media in this segment called Throne of Skulls.
As the light fades and the end draws near, where does this sit upon the Throne of Skulls?
So in Throne of Skulls, Jay and I each get 20 skulls in Grimdark Media with which to build our thrones, our personal thrones. People have asked in the past, is this to do with how grimdark we think it is or how much we liked it? The answer is yes.
Both, neither, in equal measures, totally not balanced against each other.
Our internet guys' subjective ideas of where these sit. And this is the 17th skull. We are very close to having to kick things off the list. And deciding where this sits in the landscape of Grimdark Media is sort of our thing. So we go back and forth. I will start. At 17th place is actually still my non-entity. I don't have a 17th place because I disqualified World War Z from being on the list because I did not consider it to actually be grimdark. I thought the messaging was too hopeful that we overcame everything, and it didn't make the list. So what's your 17th?
So when I first wrote my list, World War Z was going to be my 17th because it's same reasons. It's just I still think it gets on the list, but it was at the end. And then the more I thought about what I was going to say about futility, Pathologic II is my 17th.
Wow.
Because as grimdark as the presentation and the narrative, and as much as I love the visuals, the fact that you start off by establishing that none of it is real, it's not grimdark then, is it?
No, it's true.
If I'm a dude playing a video game, if I'm an actor in a play, it's not really grimdark. I get to go home afterwards.
We both DQ'd something. It's your first DQ. Hell yeah. Interesting. All right.
I thought like when I originally wrote my list, I was looking at all the things that were in the bottom, let's say third of my list and the reasons why I didn't think of them as grimdark. And I was trying to figure out which ones it would end up ahead of. And the more I thought about it, I'm like, no, these things all stick to their values more than this does.
So basically showing its ass on the idea that you can do this over and over again.
Yeah.
and until you get the right outcome, kind of ruin the grim darkness of you because you didn't
completely
have,
took me out of it.
Because so it was the meta-ness of it basically spoiled the grimdark messaging. Interesting. Well, at number 16 for me is Pathologic II, because I still consider it to be grimdark. If I only because of the negative penalties to your iterating, that you are slowly entropying out of existence basically and locking off endings. If that mechanic wasn't baked in, and don't get me wrong, I hate that mechanic. The game is actively punishing you from completing it, in addition to just it being hard. But that entropy in the recurrence system, the fact that bits of you are slipping away every time you do it, is what kept it on the list for me. So I've got it at number 16. So what about you?
Well, then now World War Z has moved effectively up a position.
Fantastic. Good job, World War Z. Number 15 for me is Rangers of Shadow Deep.
15 for me is The Last of Us Part 2.
I know it is. I still don't understand why. But that's okay. You don't have to justify because you can be wrong. And I can be wrong about this one. Number 14 for me is Event Horizon.
So wrong.
I know.
So wrong.
You hate that as much as I hate The Last of Us Part 2 being down there.
14 for me is Mordheim.
Number 13 for me is The Book of Eli.
13 for me is Astartes.
Starts. All right. Number 12 for me is Thundar the Barbarian.
Oh, yeah. 12 for me is House of Hell.
House of Hell. Still can't get over those goat worshippers, man.
I got to be honest. House of Hell being
I'm
that low.
I'm surprised it's that low for you.
House of Hell being that low is my reinforcement that I'm not just picking these based on things I like, because I like this way more than a bunch of things.
Yeah. That are ahead of it. That's fair. Number 11 for me is Mad Max Fury Road.
11 for me is Roadside Picnic.
Roadside Picnic. All right. And we are getting now into the top 10. And number 10 for me is House of Hell. It's way up there for me.
10,
formative.
10 for me is Thundar the Barbarian.
Interesting how both of those are formative for our childhoods.
Yes.
Like the Thundar is formative for your childhood and House of Hell is formative for our, because we're just that bit apart in age. Number 9 for me is Hard Boiled.
9 for me is Black Company.
Yeah, Black Company. Number 8 for me is Black Company. We're almost in alignment on that one.
Yeah. 8 for me is Fury Road.
Yeah, it is. Number 7 for me is Astartes.
7 for me is Book of Eli.
The Book of Eli. Number 6 for me is Mordheim.
6 for me is Rangers of Shadow Deep.
It's interesting how far apart we are on that one. And I think it's it's interesting.
I think it's because we look at it from two. Actually, you know what? To distill it down to like a role-playing analogy, you look at it from the player's point of view, and I look at it from the DM's point of view.
You look at it from the story point of view.
That's why we're in two different places on that.
Yeah, too noble. Number 5 for me is The Precipice of Corruption for Dungeon Crawl Classic.
5 for me is Hard Boiled.
Hard Boiled. Number 4 for me is Roadside Picnic.
4 for me is the underappreciated on the other side of the table Event Horizon.
They get rescued, man. They get rescued. Everything's okay. They close.
Do
hell. They close.
Do
hell.
they get rescued?
Baby Bear walks away.
If you haven't watched it in tandem with Ghost Ship, I don't think you understand the ending.
There's not a mud vein at the end. Number 3 for me is The Call of Cthulhu.
Not when you watch it. Yeah. Number 3 for me is Precipice of Corruption.
Number 2 for me is The Last of Us Part 2. And I want to hear you defend why it's so low for you. Defend that for me, because it is a grim, dark.
What, Last of Us Part 2?
Yeah.
So we've talked about this before. I think the reason why most of the things that we have a lot of disparity on our list, it's because you look at it from the character's point of view and I look at it from the world's point of view. Mm-hmm. And we talked about this when we did Last of Us Part 2, because for Joel, who gets his head caved in with a golf club, that's pretty dark.
Yeah. For
Ellie, whose life is more ruined than it was ruined before, it's pretty grim dark.
Yep.
But they are primarily the architects of their own misery. The world around them is bad, but most of the other characters you experience in that world are actively working to make their lives better, and their lives are becoming better. So you're
except in Seattle.
So I think your thing with Rangers, like same thing, is that your focus is on the characters in the story.
I'm on the small scale, you're on the large scale.
And my focus is on the backdrop and the setting for the story. So that's the difference, I think.
I gotcha.
If you told the story of The Last of Us without Joel and Ellie, like if you just did it as like a documentary special, would it feel all that grim dark? Like it would feel more like World War Z, where they're coming out the other side of it.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, where society's starting to rebuild. Yeah.
So anyway, that's why those are that far apart. So
well, number 2 for you?
Number 2 for me is The Thing.
It sure is. Number 1 for me is The Thing.
And number 1 for me is the Call of Cthulhu.
Is the Call of Cthulhu. It's funny how we're so close on all but like 2 or 3 things.
And again, I think most of the things were super far apart. I think that's what it comes down to. I think the only one I don't understand why we're so far apart on is Hard Boiled.
We're not that hard. We're not that far.
It's not as far as we are in a lot of.
I'm at 9. Yours is
5.
5. We're 4 spots apart on Hard Boiled. Yeah.
But that's the biggest disparity where it doesn't just boil down to.
Yeah, I don't know.
That. Yeah, I'm not sure.
I don't know. Maybe, yeah. But it's not like 20 spaces apart. I think that one's more taste than anything else.
Possibly.
It's just that one's more taste based than anything else. I think we both can agree that both the dystopian world that they live in Hard Boiled is amazing, and also the narrative story of how he comes through as a tax collector, and now he's a insurance adjuster, and now you know what I mean, like the iterative like.
It's actually funny because we've never done this before, where we've talked after the list about where we rank things and why we rank things. Hard Boiled is a much better example to me, or an example of what they were trying to do with Pathologic done better.
The live die repeat thing.
And a lot of people are going to disagree with that, and that's fine. But in my mind, it's that done better.
It's funny because I feel like if we were to do a Grimdark Media on All You Need Is Kill, which is the manga that the Edge of Tomorrow is based on, we'd have one land as being Grimdark and one land as a Tom Hanks hero movie.
Yeah,
you know, or Tom Cruise hero movie, and like. It's the same story, just like you get a very different message if you read the manga versus if you interact with the translation basically breaks it down. And Hard Boiled is one of those things where I think you're right. It's presented as a literary thing, one's represented as a video thing, and because it's like more distilled, because in a manga you're railroaded down the end of the story. It doesn't change anything. Versus in a game, you get to change things, or when you adapt it to a movie, you get to change things. Your POV can like move around and shift and stuff. So I think you're probably right. Well, up next is going to be a patron pick. And we get to do, but in between then, because we give the patrons some time for us to actually like pick something and then read it and then interact with it. I'm going to do a quick solo pair of things. One, I went and saw The Watchers, which I'll be doing an I Just Watched on. And 2, we're going to do a live stream of the BattleTech video game. So you and I are going to sit down and we'll 1 player and then we'll try in 2 players.
Which BattleTech video game?
The Sega Genesis one. Because Andrew B also sent the goods for us to basically play that and Doom Troopers, because Chase.
Oh my God!
The Doom Troopers Sega Genesis game.
I'm stoked about that.
And we'll get to do that in here. We'll do it live, so we're just gonna set up and play, and you get to watch us struggle. Because apparently the Genesis one, when you play it 2-player, one player controls the legs, one person controls the guns.
Oh my God!
So it's gonna be a fucking nightmare for us to play.
That's amazing.
And I'm so here for it. So Andrew B, again, thank you so much for sending along the gear for us to actually stream that, which is going to be super fun. And we'll be doing that as our next 2 while we buy time, basically, for the vote for the literary media. And then the next one after that will be video media, which is my choice. Get to go back to movies. I haven't decided what I'm going to pick yet, but there's a few things in the running.
Yeah, I've been organizing my my game,
and then you get to do game.
And I've been pulling out stuff. I'm like, maybe this, maybe this, maybe this.
I have a short list of films. We're gonna get back to some classics. I think maybe some modern classics. There's a few I've really wanted to do, but some good modern, some ones where it's a little more Ghost Ship and Event Horizon. I feel like that's where we really shine doing these, right?
Which makes me feel like at some point we do just have to do Ghost Ship.
That should just be a double feature. We should just watch Ghost Ship with the patrons. I think that'd be perfect. All right. Well, thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you for more Grimdark Media. Thanks for doing this, buddy.
Yeah, thanks. It was, I'm not going to say fun.
Nope, I hated it. Thanks, Andrew B, again, for suggesting this. Because we should do more of these that we hate.
Yes.
Honestly, or more that we haven't interacted with and take a chance. Because like we just keep picking things that we like, and the patrons all like the same stuff that we like. So it ends up being very like just fucking. I also feel like it's
self-congratulatory. I also feel like I've turned into whatever the anti-Gordon Ramsay is, because I never have anything bad to say about anything. And it's like, I felt good to say something bad about something.
Yeah, we don't normally do this. So yeah, we'll be back with more Grimdark Media next week. I'm Ash. Have a working.